Okay, so we're going to take a look at Hurrahing and Harvest by Hopkins. And before we read through the poem, I'd just like to comment that this poem is very similar to another one we recently looked at called The Starlight Night, in that both poems are poems of celebration, celebrating, the glory found in the beauty of the universe and how we can find God in that beauty. And the second point is that each deals with the idea of the wheat, and we think of the host being, the bread, the wheat, and in the harrowing the harvest, he spoke of the shocks within the house, in the sky, within doors house. He said the shocks, and that would be Christ, as he said, Christ home, Christ and his mother, and all his hallows. And here he speaks of the stooks, which are like haystacks or the cocks of hay in Ireland. And so he's using the idea of the harvest and the wheat, and he's bringing out the presence of Christ. And that is important because in all of his work, that's one of the main themes that he works at. He's constantly trying to show or bring the reader close to Christ through a manifestation of Christ in nature, and bringing that out through his syntax, which is difficult. And speaking about that, he he constantly is pushing the edges of experience in language, and he remains true to the form that he's writing in, like the sonnet. No matter how difficult and how crazy the syntax might appear, yet the poem itself is a well structured piece of poetry with the octave and the sestet and the rhyming scheme, and everything is intact. So his elusiveness in writing, for the reader, is challenging. And I'll read you a quote. It says, his friend Robert Bridges once remarked, commenting on this obscureness, that it was like a great dragon folded at the gate to avoid all entrance. Almost like it was an impediment for readers to gain a full understanding of what he's all about. And I mentioned in another blog that I uploaded that Marion Moore said, I too dislike it, speaking of poetry. And she said, because we don't enjoy things we don't understand. So he does that through his difficult syntax, but it just demands that the reader has to engage. It's a commitment on the part of the reader to engage in the work in order to gain understanding. So behind all of this difficult syntax, there is also a profound power of faith, and central to all of his work is his belief in the real presence of Christ. And all of his works deal with the incarnation of Christ, the Word becoming flesh and entering into our human history. So he believed that that language had the power to incarnate God's presence in nature and in man. He believed that words, like sacraments, are outward signs of invisible grace, and that the presence of Christ in the world can be found. Through his use of in-stress, he continually sought to bring Christ's presence into our lives and demonstrate how the incarnation has given us a fullness of life. And that was, the main stress behind his work. It's a sacramental quality to his work. He demands us to engage in it, and then we'll be rewarded with this awareness of Christ in the world through a recognition of Christ's manifestation in all of creation. And this poem particularly brings that out with one line that says, like Christ being found in nature. He says, "These things were here, the beauty, but for the beholder wanting." In other words, this beauty has been around, since the beginning of time, and we are jaded to it. I recall once when I went to Ireland the first time, 1962, I stopped along the road and I commented to a fellow walking along saying, "Oh my God, this beauty surrounding here was on the Ring of Kerry." I said, "This beauty is overwhelming. Do you get used to it?" He says, "Oh, I don't even see it anymore. So I think that illustrates the idea that I'm trying to point out, that Hopkins sought to bring that beauty out for the reader through his poetry so that we can see Christ manifested in all of nature. So with that said, we'll read through the poem, and then I'll give a little analysis of it. So he begins the poem with a declarative sentence. "Summer ends now. Now, barbarous in beauty, the stooks rise around. Up above, what wind walks, what lovely behavior of silk-sack clouds has wilder, windful, wavier, meal drift molded ever and melted across skies. I walk, I lift up heart, eyes, down all that glory in the heavens to glean our Savior, and eyes, heart, what looks, what lips yet gave you a rapturous love's greeting of realer, of rounder replies. And the azurous hung hills are his world-wielding shoulder, majestic as a stallion stalwart, very violet sweet. These things were here, but the beholder wanting, which too, when they once meet, the heart rears wings bold and bolder, and hurls for him, oh, half hurls earth for him, off under his feet." So it is a poem of celebration of beauty here. And he begins slowly with, as I say, a declarative statement. It's the end of summer, and then he goes on to describe what he sees before him. Just to point a note here that he wrote this poem after coming home from a fishing excursion. Like he just went fishing somewhere, and on the way home, he was looking up at the sky, and it was filled with all this activity in the opening stanza. "Barbarous beauty, the stooks rise around above, what wind walks, what lovely behavior of silk-sack clouds, has wilder, windful, wavier, meal-drifted, molded ever, and melted across such skies." Okay, so the first two quatrains are questions, and he asks us, have you ever seen anything so more beautiful than this? The wildness in nature. It's like a riot of beauty in the clouds formations. And then the next, he says, "Down all that glory in the heavens to glean our Savior, and eyes, heart, what looks, what lips yet gave back." You could put the word back in there. "Such a rapturous greeting of realer, rounder replies." In other words, if you look closely at things, they look back at you. The glory, the beauty that you see in nature actually looks back at you and gives you that uplifting feeling of wonderment. Never before have your eyes, heart, or lips felt such a greeting as this that you see before you. Rapturous love's greeting of realer, of rounder replies. So that would be the giving back of the scene that you're looking at. And then now he goes on to speak of Christ. And he says, right, because this is the sestet, remember? In the sonnet, we have the octave, which presents one scene, and that's what we just looked at. And the sestet is kind of like a commentary. In this case, he is referring to Christ. And the azurous hung hills are his, Christ's, will-wielding shoulder, majestic as a stallion stalwart, very violet sweet. So it's almost as if the blue hung hills are blending in to the skyline, and almost like in a majestic way, these are on the shoulder of Christ, very violet sweet. These things were here, but for the beholder. In other words, lacking the beholder to witness them. They've always been here, wanting for someone to see it and respond to it. And then he says, when that happens, when these two, once they meet, the beauty and the beholder, the heart of the beholder will rear wings, bold and bolder. It'll be almost like the horse going back on its feet, you know what I mean? Being confronted by this, being spooked by it, in this case, the beauty, and hurls for him, half hurls earth for him off under his feet. In other words, he is thrown off his feet by the splendor and beauty of it all. And using the word glean, obviously he's referring to the harvest now, and in that we see Christ. So I'll walk you through the analysis that I put together here. And then I talk about another poem by Robert Frost. The season of fall is a favorite subject for poets because of its beautiful imagery and its abundance of color and detail. Robert Frost paints a mood of serenity in his opening stanza of a poem entitled Waiting, in which he describes a narrator who steals away to an abandoned field at the close of day after the field hands have gone to their homes. And the mood of this, the tone and everything, is a little bit quieter than the uproarious, tumultuous scene that we saw in the sky in Hopkins' poem. And this is what it says. What things for dream there are when spectre-like, moving among tall haycocks lightly piled, I enter alone upon the stubble field, from which the laborers' voices late have died, and in the antipathy afterglow and rising full moon, sit me down upon the full moon side of the first haycock, and lose myself amid so many alike. So it's twilight, the man is alone, he steals into an empty field after the workers have left, and we see the haycocks like we do in the Hopkins poem, the Stooks, lightly piled, as he said, and he sits down beside one and loses himself in reverie. So in each of these two poems, we have the same kind of situation happening between the narrator and his environment, what he finds around him. So this scene offers the narrator an opportunity for reverie as he dwells on pleasant thoughts pertaining to his life and his surroundings, perhaps. A similar kind of experience occurs in Hopkins' Hurrahing and Harvest. After a brisk walk home from a fishing experience, the poet encountered a tumultuous fall sky which affected his mindset with extreme enthusiasm. Using the sonnet, he shares that experience as well as his meditation on its significance. All right, so in that regard, each of these two poems are similar. The opening quatrain beginning, in Hopkins' poem, "Summer ends now," goes on to say that the season of autumn is filled with a barbarous beauty, which is rather an unusual word for using with beauty, pairing with beauty. Barbarous, sounds like it's not cultured or not sedate, not, it's just wild, okay? And in Keats's poem, To Autumn, he refers it to a season of mists and mellow fruitfulness, while Shelley's Ode to the West Wind calls it a breath of autumn spring, and describing the dead leaves as pestilence-stricken multitudes, yellow and black and pale and hectic red, like ghosts from an enchanter fleeing. So each of these poets deal with the subject of autumn, each in a different way, and creates a different kind of mood. Hopkins' octave gives us a panoramic view, both landscape and sky, suggesting a riot of beauty, with the word barbarous connoting uncivilized or uncultivated behavior. The haycocks, called the stooks, rise around him, but lifting eyes upward, we are given the view of a storm of activity in the sky. The beauty of the clouds are the subject of a question to the reader. And that question is, has anyone ever seen such a lovelier manifestation of such wonderment? What lovelier behavior has ever melted across the skies? He uses sprung rhythm, whereby he repeats similar word sounds or syllables in such a way that the words seem to spring off the page. For example, the second line reads, "Around, up above, what wind walks, what lovely behavior." This change of rhythms and meters contributes to the scene so that the rhythmic cadence seems uplifting. We participate with Hopkins in the exhilaration of what he is witnessing. The sprung rhythm is used to show how glorious the world is. Our eyes and heart rejoice in the scene with him. The second quatrain seems to ask the question, when we see all this rapturous beauty, do we interpret it as simply part of the material world, as I explained in that experience I had with that boy in Ireland who was walking along that mountainous pathway, and he didn't see it beyond that. He was lost in the forest for the trees. Or do we see it as a manifestation of God's presence in the world? Do we see all this beauty, or do we look at it and return a rapturous greeting to our Savior, or do we see the world as separate from God? Encountering God will return a greeting never before experienced. What lips gave you a rapturous love's greeting such as this, he asks. In the line, "Down all that glory in the heavens to glean our Savior," Hopkins' choice of word glean is well chosen, for it suggests the gathering of grain or fruit from a field or vineyard after the regular harvesters have been through the field. Here we have been told the clouds were meal drift molded, which complements the image of the harvest work in the field, workers in the field. The sestet, the latter part of the poem, continues the description of majesty, introducing an image of Christ appearing in the heavens, draped in a purple shawl over his shoulders, through the details of the hills blending into the azure sky, almost as though the hills were suspended from the sky. This beauty has always been here, we are told. It has just been waiting for a beholder to appear and appreciate it. Making this encounter, that is, seeing the splendor of Christ at work in the world, will bring never-before experienced bliss, which too, when they once meet, the heart rears wings, bold and bolder, and hurls for him, half hurls earth for him, off under his feet. Beholding and comprehending the source of this wonderment will figuratively hurl one off his feet. This concept of seeing and finding God in nature and in all of creation is a common theme in many of Hopkins' other poems. Inscape is an invented word for Hopkins' development of ideas in his poetic creations, an element of seeing a thing in all its selfhood, in all its distinctiveness, and shaping that experience into his work. He believed that a thing's outward beauty is proof of its inward beauty. He believed Inscape to be a moment of grace, a fleeting view of the world transfigured. So that's why I say it has a sacramental quality to it, to the words. It's like the words have a power of incarnating Christ in words. To him, it was a living testament to the psalm, the heavens declare the glory of God, and all creation proclaims his handiwork. The same theme, by the way, that we saw in the Starlight Night. So getting back to Frost's opening poem, unlike the narrator's reflection there, Hopkins depicts the presence of God's glory in his narrator's account, an encounter with the Hurrahing and the harvest. So you see the difference between Hopkins and most other poems. His works are sacramental in nature, and in almost every one there is an insight into Christ at work in the universe at the present time.